So, you're downstairs. You're about to go upstairs when you realize the light at the back of the basement is still on. So you head to the back and you grab the pull cord, and just as you're about to pull, that thought crosses your mind. What if I'm not alone down here? So you pull the cord and you race towards the stairs and you hurry up. The thing, it's right behind you. It's going to get you. And when you get to the top of the stairs, you feel a little bit silly because you're an adult. You shouldn't get scared of things like that. This is the area that H.P. Lovecraft lives in. And we're going to be talking about some of his best works.
Welcome to the 800's. I am one of your hosts, Alex, and this is your other host, Adam, who gave you that lovely, horrific introduction. So now, quick word about our sponsors.
So the music you heard at the beginning of our stream is from Incompetech. It's called Fearless First. They're a great place to grab any sort of music for any kind of feels you want to generate. We used to use them for our podcast, Roll with Advantage, and we're going to continue to use them for probably any audio-based project that we have. That's incompetech.filmmusic.io. You can check our website for more details for what they have to offer. Of websites, check out dmstable.com/audible to get a free subscription for Audible. 1 month free, and you get a free audiobook download. Again, there's more details at dmstable.com. Don't want to bore you guys too much with all the details right away, but Audible and Incompetech is where it's at.
So let's get right into it. The first book that we read for this week was The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. It is a series of short stories that he wrote in the summer of 1926, and it was released in 1928. Covers briefly 3 different sections, one of which actually came from H.P. Lovecraft's own dreams, the one that he had in 1919, at least according to Wikipedia, because we all know how reliable that is. It covers a little bit of the mythology behind the Cult of Cthulhu, which he discovers through an artist who saw the great dread monster in his dream and created a bas-relief of said creature, which was described to be a combination of human, dragon, and octopus. And it goes on to describe the horrors of this ancient creature which lies dead but dreaming. And how it is somehow able to reach the people of our world through their dreams and cause them to become obsessed in such a way that they form cults that do all sorts of crazy, indescribable things, and somehow it affects us all over the world. It describes also the homeland of Cthulhu, Relia. Really hard to pronounce, but I think that's the whole point from H.P. Lovecraft. Is he definitely loved creating things that were meant to be hard to describe, because what's scarier than the unknown?
Yes. So yeah, tonight we're starting off our very first book club for the 800's. So I want to describe to you guys exactly how we'll be doing that, considering there's only 2 of us on video, but we hope to have more than just the 2 of us discussing this book. So what we'll do is Alex and I will mention something that we want to talk about, part of the book, a conflict, some other point in the book that bears discussion. We'll broach it in the form of a question or topic, and then Alex and I will go back and forth a little bit, and we'll be looking out for comments in the comment section of the Twitch. If you peel your eyes there now, you'll see, yay, comments. And if we see your comment, we'll definitely talk about it and reply to you guys.
All right, and just a couple quick disclaimers. This is a show that is aimed towards adults. It isn't meant for kids. They're welcome to join, but just be aware of the fact that while we won't try and swear all the time, we're also really not going to censor ourselves in that way, and the books we cover may very well have themes in them, so proceed with caution in that regard. Also, we're trying to build a supportive community in which people can explore their interests and hobbies, so please be nice or the ban hammer will be dropped. And finally, specific to this book, we acknowledge that there are racist actions, words, and themes throughout this book and the stories, though unfortunately, we don't have the proper experience or expertise to discuss these issues with the care that they really deserve. So we will say this: the DM's table and all associated shows, i.e. the 800's and all other publications, disdain and do not tolerate the intolerance of people based on any aspect of who they are, what their physical or mental abilities are, and our community is one of acceptance, and we hold our community to the same standards as we do ourselves. That being said, we do not intend to discuss the subject further, even through chat, again, because we don't have the proper authority in any way to do so. We will instead discuss aspects of this work that make it a classic, what spawned an entire genre of stories, games, and all other forms of media.
Well said.
Thank you.
So without further ado, let's dive right back into the Call of Cthulhu.
Oh, and one other thing, quickly. Forgot in our introductions to introduce our man on tech, the guy who is running our chat, Alan, creator of the DM's table. So let's have a round of applause. All right.
For the man behind the screen. This screen, right here, this one. All right, Call of Cthulhu.
All right, what were your first impressions, my good man?
So, I gotta say, this book isn't like any other book per se that I've read. It's definitely a novella, first off. Alex and I both listened to this in audio format, and in audio, it's I think just under 2 hours to get through the entire thing. Is that right?
Yeah, I think about hour and a half, hour 40 minutes at most.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So right off the bat, I was like, I mean, how in depth really can you get into? How immersed can you get into a story that only lasts an hour and a half? So I kind of had that in the back of my head when we first started. I was like, all right, this isn't going to be like a suck me in kind of story. And when it first started out, I did have that impression of like, okay, when's the book going to start? There's a lot of setup here. It's only an hour and a half long. We're still narrating what's going on. And then kind of before I knew it, we were into the book. This was the book. It catches you very off guard, in my opinion, where it's just like, here you go. You're in the story without even realizing it. What are your thoughts, Alex?
I would agree to an extent. I have a little more experience with reading short stories and novellas, and a lot of them do tend to have that style to them to an extent because they have to. How are you going to pull somebody into a story, get it published, if you don't get to things really quickly? I know that we're kind of used to bigger books that are slow burners for the most part, but I do think that H.P. Lovecraft has a particular way of doing it that sucks you in a much more what's the word I'm looking for here?
Like subtle or something?
Actually, I would say the opposite. It's a
More like a
very
blunt approach?
it's a very dramatic entrance into the theme because like you said, it starts off with kind of a mellow setting, you getting to know a couple of characters, and then all of a sudden he throws out, oh, this giant monster of nightmares is right here, and somebody made a piece of art about it, which seems innocuous at first, but then all of a sudden he starts introducing these ideas of uh, this creature's ability to psychically link itself to you and control parts of how you live your life. And all of a sudden the creepiness sets in. Like, not just freaky, but creepy.
Yeah, it was definitely a very creepy setting. I think it helped a little bit that the audiobook plays a little bit of those creepy tunes in it, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and it also plays off of this style of writing. I think was not uncommon for the time, because you can see it in things like War of the Worlds did something similar, where it takes something monstrous or something outside of the realm of normal possibility and treats it as some sort of observational writing, as if it's real. Because this is something that the way he writes it is his experience of it through another person's experience of it. So he's observing things that are very much concrete and real, at least to start. And
Yeah.
then that lends itself to giving the unreal aspects of it a sort of reality and an anchor point in our world.
Yeah.
And that's how he catches you.
Yeah, Alan says the book was good but hard to remember compared to his other works. I haven't read his other works, so I can't really comment too much on that. But
Nor can I, and I can see why it might be harder to remember. It has one of his most notable characters in Cthulhu. Like, when you think popular culture and you think Lovecraftian types of creatures, Cthulhu is one of the ones that comes to mind, at least for me, the most immediately. But Cthulhu is, while a central character, it represents something a little bit distant. The problem isn't Cthulhu per se, it's what his presence, it's the effect his presence has on the people that the narrator is interacting with.
mm-hmm.
And when you have that sort of background character being the primary antagonist, less so the people that the narrator's interacting with, it almost feels like a prequel to something rather than the actual uh, true source of conflict. Like, you're waiting for something bigger to happen. And I know there's a lot more direct conflict that happens in some of his other books. I only know from basic summaries. But
I think what you said is right on the money, right? Because how many stories have been created now about the mythical beast Cthulhu, and how many stories are about what happens after this story? So Lovecraft inspired other writers or just regular people who became writers because of their love for the Cthulhu story and wrote legends about it. So,
and now that I've read this, one of the interesting things is I kept thinking about how familiar some of it felt, and I think again it's because of how much his in-depth creations inspired other forms of media, authors, video games. I mean, I'm pretty sure most experienced DMs in Dungeons and Dragons have probably had some form of character inspired by him.
yeah.
But even so, like, just in general, the themes, like the setup for that psychic horror seemed incredibly familiar. I don't know if that, I can't really think of any examples of that prior
Alan,
to H.P. Lovecraft anyway.
Alan says the great old one in D&D, which is obviously exactly that, right? Some
Yeah.
mythical beast. Mind Flayer, that's another good example. It's got the tentacles. Yeah. exactly. So, Alex, how did the story overall after the entire thing or during the entire thing, how did it make you feel?
I mean, I was curious more than anything because, well, at least for me, I'm huge into mythology. Always have been, and I just wanted to know more about these great old ones because H.P. Lovecraft does a really good job of setting up something that you can tell is incredibly powerful, has a lot of influence, and it's ancient, but what are the origins? So my mind immediately went to origin stories. And then it starts talking about how it creeps into dreams and how people don't even realize what it's doing to them and it's messing with their minds. And I got a little creeped out by it, I'm not gonna lie. But that's the entire premise of his writing is to creep you out. He was trying to give people a glimpse into a very dark mind.
Yes, yep. I
What
definitely
about
agree with
you?
that creepiness. Like for me, the creep factor was definitely there. I was definitely I first listened to it at work, and I did get very immersed with it once the story started going and once the narrator started finding out more and more details. And another effect that this book had on me was it uh-oh, I'll be right back.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and take a quick pause while we sort out a few technical difficulties. We will be right back. All right, so I believe we left off with a little bit of going over how the book made you feel.
Yeah.
Adam, you mentioned being creeped out by it. Care to?
Yes, yeah, definitely creeped me out. And I also got a big sense of like investigative nature, right? So it made me want to look into these stories that the narrator mentions about, the great old beasts of legend and stuff. Made me want to Google it and see what kind of lore is out there. So it definitely absorbs you, right? It sucks you into the story, makes you want to know more.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to elaborate a little bit on the creepiness factor, at least for myself. My background, for those who don't know me, is in psychology. So anything that affects the mind intrigues me, even if it's something that's entirely fictional. But the fact that H.P. Lovecraft chose to have these creatures manifest themselves as uh, telepathically linked creatures that didn't necessarily communicate in words, but would communicate in feelings and visions, and uh, in fact, would, if they weren't already the source of all mental illness, would manifest themselves as symptoms of mental illness. And it, while I know that's not the case, it's a weird thing to think about. Is what if we did live in a world where mental illness was the cause of these great old ones, these beings from other dimensions that was their way of interacting with their universe, was to push,
Telepathically reach out and
well, and cause, psychic chaos. That's really what it was. I believe that's basically how Lovecraft described it himself. Is he they would cause chaotic sensations in people. Let me double check that one, see if it is in there verbatim.
well, he talks about people having the dreams and what it does to them and stuff like that. But yeah, the VS Drake, I think that's where he's good at playing is in the what ifs. That's definitely a good point, right? There's a lot of unknown in the story. The guy is reading these stories about Cthulhu. He's reading recollections of Cthulhu. He's reading things that are linked without ever knowing each other. And the whole time he's like, okay, yeah, right. And then there's the longer you go through the story, he's like, what if these people aren't crazy? What if this is a thing that's real? What if Cthulhu is really down there somewhere in some long forgotten city just waiting to attack?
Well, and part of that you have to take into account is the historical context of like when this was released in the mid to late 1920s. Is there was a lot more of the world that was undiscovered,
Yeah,
and you couldn't just Google things, and scientific foundations for the way the world worked were still highly in flux in a lot of different fields of study, including things like geography, uh, mental health, and even biology of the world's animal population, or whatever these abominations are. You can
yeah,
even classify them as animals. So what he like you said, he kind of masterfully brings in these unknowns in the world and gives them a likely fictional but just plausible enough explanation for things that somehow fit together. And he I think what he does especially well is he leaves gaps. He leaves gaps that allow the reader to fill in. And
yeah,
if you think about how readers back in the 1920s would have filled this in, you know, ghosts, ghouls, demons, and stuff were still much more in the realm of possibility for certain people, depending on your belief set. And by filling it with something ancient, unknowable, and incredibly powerful, it's hard for that not to creep in. It's like telling somebody not to think it's zebras.
yep, yeah. I think to attest to that too is even in today's world where a lot more of the world has been explored, we know a lot more about our own planet. It still gives you that creep what if factor of what could it really be? What could really be existing down in the deep?
Well, yeah, in our chat, Alan mentioned that Rilia is actually a place, and this short story gives geological coordinates like longitude and latitude,
Yeah.
and it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, somewhere between Chile and New Zealand. In fact, in part three, the ship they sent out to find Rilia departed from New Zealand, I believe.
Yeah, I
And
forget exactly where, but I'll take your word
I,
for it.
yeah, it was from New Zealand. I just can't remember which city.
Okay.
But the fact that he gave these very realistic details, just enough to anchor it in reality.
It says, yeah, you could go check this out if you want, but like how many of us can charter a boat to go to this specific location and check it out, right?
Especially back then. I mean,
Yep.
what? And he also, I looked this up. He chose a spot that was outside of the vast majority of shipping lanes too. So
So it's well
it's
researched and good location.
well, yeah, he chose a location that, like, even for people who were in the know about the area, probably didn't know it. I mean, think about just how huge the Pacific Ocean is. I mean, you can hide entire continents. I mean, that's the whole premise, like Alan just said in our chat, behind Atlantis. Is these sunken cities that just exist just outside the realm of our ability to interact with them.
Yep, definitely. So yeah, it's definitely creep, definitely mystery. You get any other sort of feels from this book?
I got a little bit of a sense of adventure. Like, it goes a little bit along with that curiosity, and I think you kind of mentioned it as well. Is it and this is again a bit because of the historical aspect of it, but it was that sense of let's go out and find this. Like I want to know more, and back then you had to go and find it yourself,
Yep.
and I was a little bit surprised because I was not expecting that at all.
Yeah, I
Poke the
didn't
bear field, says Alan.
poke the bear.
For sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
I got more of like a like it's leaning you towards don't go digging where you don't belong, right?
well, yeah, he definitely says that in the beginning. He sets it up by talking about how knowledge in general has its limits for what should be known. There are things that should be left alone. But at this, in the same token, he's writing this book. His character's is like, I never want to contribute to this at all. And then he's writing this, and he's just like, well, I hope nobody takes it and spreads it around if they find it when I die. Like, but one of the things that made me think about, and maybe this is just the creepy conspiracy that he created within the book itself, is like, how much is his this character, this narrator character, influenced by Cthulhu and the Great Old Ones? Is it their influence that causes him to go against his specific vice of not delving into certain information and create a physical document with said information on it anyway?
Yeah.
Like,
In
is this
an
character?
effort to bring Cthulhu back to life, kind of a deal.
Yeah, like, is he? He doesn't say it, but that's where my mind went. And if that's what he intended, then good on you, H.P. Lovecraft, because holy crap.
I think that brings up like the big question of at near the end of the story, he talks about how everybody who's ever been influenced with Cthulhu has been killed.
Mhm.
In some way or another, they've ended up dead. And he expects the same to happen to him.
That's a
Is
really
it
good point.
is it Cthulhu and Cthulhu's followers killing him, or is it some other organization that exists that is going around and finding these people and saying, nope, you're trying to bring back Cthulhu, or your actions could lead to the return of Cthulhu. We don't want that. We're going to kill you.
I got the impression that there might be something out there external to the cults, but I always just, I guess, assumed that it was an extension of the Great Old Ones, as they brought people in uh, to uh, engage with them. They feed off of that interaction with these people, and what they do is they create chaos, and as Alan said in our chat, they cause them to go insane, and that's what they feed off of, and that is why they all end up dying. Whether so, I never thought of it, like, I never even considered until just now that there might be something else. I always thought it was in an internal thing, and it was just how these things fed off of us. That's why they interact with us. You know, when you go back into the lore of a lot of ancient gods, what do they feed off? They feed off of prayer, they feed off of sacrifice. And that's pretty common for most polytheistic gods, if not some monotheistic ones. So they didn't seem that different, except they take it essentially by force, telepathic force, but force.
Yeah. I think that's a good theory too. Is it too much for humans to interact, so their mind breaks from interacting with Cthulhu, right?
Yeah, and I think they feed off of that break. Like, that break is a release of energy. It's like breaking open a bone for the marrow or something like that. You know.
Oh, that's a disturbing thought.
Yeah, welcome to HP Lovecraft, man.
Um,
Gonna live there, bud?
yeah, maybe talking about Cthulhu too much. Moving on, let's
Sweet
talk.
dreams.
No, right before bedtime, right? Let's talk about conflicts a little bit. Um,
I why don't you go ahead and start this one off? I've started off the last couple, so
okay. So the main conflict in my mind is let's sell the story of Cthulhu to the reader. Let's make them believe that Cthulhu is a threat and is out there, right? If you don't believe at least a little bit about Cthulhu, if you don't believe that there's some lost sunken city in the middle of the South Pacific, then the story didn't do its job. So to me, the greatest conflict you hear in this book is believe the nightmare.
so effectively that sounds like if you I know that prior to doing this we discussed the conflicts in literature, classic, modern, postmodern. That feels like very much a man versus reality. Is we're trying to the man being the narrator is trying to force the reader to face reality and to question it in a way. And that's what all of the characters in the story do as well.
Yeah.
Uh, they end up questioning what they know until their mind breaks.
Yeah.
And that's, whether that had already happened to H.P. Lovecraft or not is up for speculation, but I think he was trying to get people to have to deal with that as well. Um, pers- uh, I actually really like that as the main theme because, like, I had initially thought man versus God, your typical man versus, the great old ones. You'd think gods, but I think that might be a little on the nose, especially for H.P. Lovecraft, because God knows, God knows, no pun intended, that he did not like to be direct with anything that he did as far as interactions. I mean, the characters he created themselves don't directly interact with anybody,
Yeah.
at least not in any tangible way. So I think that's a really good point that he was trying to get the reader to look at themselves and look at reality.
Yeah, which, as V.S. Drake said, the 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 mode by which Lovecraft did that is the narrator's journey towards skepticism and acceptance, right? So starts out, oh, my uncle was a little bit eccentric and had all these crazy theories, and actually, the more I read here, yes, this makes sense. Cthulhu exists.
Well, yeah, it progresses, like you said. I think that's a very good point, and I hadn't really pieced it together until you just mentioned it there, where he does start out very skeptical, where he's just like, "Oh, this is the ramblings of an old man who just got interested in his story." Then it was a young artist who had taken advantage of an old man who was considered. I'm going to use the term specifically that they used in the book, queer. Queer. I wasn't sure if they meant how exactly they meant it for historical context, but he was essentially an outcast in society. And then he starts looking at how it is woven into the rituals of, again, not typical Western society, but it's woven into the traditions of whole peoples and tribes. And then he's just like, well, crap, now I got to see it for myself.
Yeah.
So it's like this slow progression into obsession with Cthulhu and Relia and the Great Old Ones.
Yep, I would agree with that. Plus, like the transition, right, from the city where people had dreams. What was it, like New York or something, where the artist and them were.
Mhm.
Let me look it up real quick. So
And
they
thank
start
you
out.
to
Go
just a
ahead.
quick thank you to Alan in our chat for getting us that historical context. The queer in this one is meant to mean strange, which is what I thought. I just wasn't sure when it came into the cultural zeitgeist as being a slur. and it doesn't seem to be the case in this one. So thank you again, Alan.
Yeah. And I liked the transition from there was the crazy dreams to the cult that I forget the inspector's name.
Frank, Lagras.
Legras, yeah. Inspector Legras went after the cult of Cthulhu at one point in a wilderness area. And, that kind of adds weight to the is Cthulhu real thing when you have these dreams coming out and then you have this cult that seems to be tied together. They have the same visionary, right? They've got the statue and the cult, and they've got the perspective of the god Cthulhu in the dreams. It just kind of says, well, these are dreams, but wait, there's this cult. And this cult has existed for a long time, apparently, and they have that same image. So if there's this cult way over here, and there's these dreams way over here, and they both have the same imagery, then maybe it's real.
And again, especially in a time where, it's not like this was, oh, I randomly came across this on the internet. No, this was in a time where you were lucky to know somebody 50 miles away ever. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point there, that he did a good job correlating things that were separate, and it brought them together, and it gives it that cohesive, this is something bigger kind of feel to it. Like, this is how you get people hooked. And honestly, I'm trying to think about myself. Like, if I had read this book when it first came out in like 1926, I'm just trying to imagine myself in that kind of era, and I think I would not just be slightly creeped out. I would be legitimately like questioning fundamental things in my life.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the experiences that we'll never be able to have fully, is living in that era. Tin hat.
Tin hat. Very much so. I don't think I ever would have gotten to that point, but like I think it would have had a much bigger sense of dread feeling to it. Like, it would have weighed heavier for sure. And it might have taken me a while to get back to 100% normal. Let's put it that way.
I think kind of riffing off how it makes you feel here is another conflict about Cthulhu is like, as rational adults, we know, okay, Cthulhu doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, can we prove he doesn't exist?
Welcome to the Tin Hat Club.
Similar stream of thought here is like if you remember when you were a child doing the Bloody Mary thing in the mirror.
Yeah.
Right, you say Bloody Mary 3 times in front of the mirror, and then she appears behind you, and right? And at that time, even as a kid, that's not going to happen. It's impossible. The laws of physics say that things don't just appear out of thin air. There's no magical wording that's going to make stuff just happen. But at the same time, when your friends dare you to do it, right? And you go in there and you're like, oh, okay, I'll do it.
That last
So you go to do it, right? You stand in the mirror and you're like, this won't happen, and then you start to do it and you're like, maybe this will happen.
Especially right? that last Bloody Mary is just like, just that sense of tension.
After you say it 3 times, you don't go, maybe nothing happened. You go, did anything happen?
Or you breathe that sigh of relief when nothing happened, even though you should have known the whole time. Yes, we do want to make that.
Yep. That's exactly what we were going for. So you're
Yeah,
welcome.
this is our last hurrah for Halloween. And speaking of which, if you ever want a good adult Halloween read, I highly recommend uh, Call of Cthulhu and the works of H.P. Lovecraft, because even as a rational adult, it's still creepy. Which
Yeah.
I think honestly that's what impressed me the most by it, is the fact that I felt that at all. And I typically don't feel creeped out by anything that isn't in my face and visceral. Like that's a very rare thing for me to feel. So I think that speaks to the power and uh, evocative nature of his words and the things that he describes.
A story written almost 100 years ago still has the ability to get under your skin.
Yeah,
That's
and
a cool part about it.
yeah, just to think of the mind that that came from, though, man. Especially again considering that context that he was inspired by a dream. Like my
Yeah.
dreams are weird, but they're not that weird. Oh man.
Any other conflicts come to mind, Alex, that you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a lot of like superficial conflicts between characters. Is um, e- like you said, the Inspector Lagros versus these cult members, and I think there is a certain part of H.P. Lovecraft that is trying to question society as a whole, uh, or at least our perceptions of it. In what way, I don't want to speculate because it starts leading down a kind of dicey road, but I think he is specifically trying to get you to look at how we interact with the world and each other and question it. So that's about all he. Well, I guess he also has that conflict with himself where he's questioning how um he interacts with the world, and like we talked about his progression from skeptic to curious adventurer, and then finally ending with a, well, I'm in it now and I think I might die.
Yeah.
uh
I
and
like I
go
like
ahead.
what V.S. Drake has there, the cult versus the world, right? The cult is unhappy with the direction the world is taking and wants change to be brought about.
Hmm.
So
Well, and
that's go ahead.
it's easy to play on that too, because when you want change in the world and you meet other people that want that same change, it's very easy to get sucked into that. And it's, you know, it's a bit of a sometimes it feels like a bit of a scapegoat to say, oh, well, it wasn't me who did these crazy things in the name of the change that I wanted. It was this ancient god that made it. But it still stems from a very real place of a group of people want something to change. They find something that unites them and wind up doing crazy things to create said change, but still.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's definitely
mob mentality.
it's like in linking it to recent times, right?
Mhm.
With the not to get political and we'll move off this pretty quick, but with the election, the general election coming up in a couple of days here, there's a lot of, infighting and
Mhm.
people who have their own beliefs about how this country should be ran and very strong beliefs and stuff like that. So like you can even you can link it to like the cults feelings about how the world is screwed and they need to
Do
do
something
something
about
about it is something that's very real even in today's climate, right?
it. Yeah, and I think I think you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the fact that these are people with very strong views, and just like the cults in H.P. Lovecraft's novella, it's something that is very easy to get wrapped up in, and something that can lead you to doing things that wind up with, Inspector Legras knocking on the door and taking, what was it, like 40 something prisoners.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a bit of a cautionary tale, and it goes to that thing that the narrator says at the beginning: is certain information is not meant to be dwelt upon too much, because it winds up leading you down these dark paths.
I hate something that's going on in
I
politics today, so I'm gonna awaken Cthulhu.
pretty sure Cartman did that in an episode of South Park.
Anyway, let's talk about the ending here real quick.
Right?
So near the end of the story, a sailor is discovered that went to Relay, or however you say the
Well, yeah,
Cthulhu village,
well, yeah.
Relia, and met Cthulhu and was essentially driven insane.
Hmm.
So I think that moment kind of sold it for me, because it's something that is still word of mouth, right? It's still something that the narrator is Francis is reading in a journal or talking to somebody about. He doesn't experience it. He's still secondhand knowledging everything. But at the same time, the story about, I didn't have a vision. I don't worship maybe this thing that exists. I went and saw this thing,
Hmm.
you know. It's
Well, yeah,
it really hits home really strong, and really lands credence to the whole make you believe Cthulhu exists conflict.
yeah. Nothing like an eyewitness to make it feel real, right?
Yeah.
Especially when that eyewitness has gone insane and won't stop laughing at nothing. uh, but yeah, I think you're right. That's kind of where he takes something that is legend, something that is off in the distance, and makes it tangible, like, and is about as direct as he can make it without actually encountering it. They encounter somebody who had encountered it,
Yeah.
which I thought was an interesting part of this story, is that the narrator never directly meets it, and yet it potentially has this power over him, for one, and two, it's an interesting narrative choice in general, because it's almost like this being wants to be known in third person until it's too late.
Well, I think that's something he addresses too, right? Is near the end he goes, "Ooh, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have investigated this. I got to nope out of here," right?
Yeah, but again, with that last little bit where he's just like, I hope nobody shares this, or no other eye meets what I've written, I think he realizes that even that was too far.
Hmm. And
And
I think too, like while the sailor is recounting his time in the great city of Cthulhu,
Mhm.
he doesn't describe what happens to Cthulhu. He doesn't see it. He leaves before it happens. Is Cthulhu chasing him? Did Cthulhu go back to sleep? Did he drown in the ocean? We don't know. It's left wide open so that as the reader, we have this immense feeling of uncertainty about how to approach what could possibly be going on behind the scenes.
yeah, I hadn't really thought about that way either, because I thought it was a little more blatant that Cthulhu was alive, and like, because he's like, we did something by accident that these cults who had been trying for thousands of years had been unable to do, for like for all of history and beyond, and a sailor did it by stumbled into it, and now it's awake. Now, you are right. There is some vagueness in there as to what state Cthulhu is in for the most part, how awake he is, and what kind of influence he could have. And I think you're exactly right that that's what makes it such a powerful ending. Is it's like, what next? Like this thing that could be real is now potentially active, not asleep, not dead and dreaming, but active, awake, and hungry. What for? Hard to tell.
Yeah. So I guess yeah, I did look up the ending a little bit. It does say Cthulhu dives into the ocean
Mm.
pursuing the vessel. I guess my point is he he attacks Cthulhu and then flees again,
Mhm.
and he sees Cthulhu recovering from the attack. But the big question is what happens after that?
Well, yeah, and he
Is
very
Cthulhu,
deliberately says nothing.
yeah.
Like, yeah, V.S. Drake had a good point. He drove backwards. He drove a freaking steamship backwards just to get away from this thing. So it's like the 1920s nautical version of Tokyo drifting. Yeah, and it is kind of interesting though that he talks about how a little bit of how after that point he starts seeing Cthulhu kind of showing up in areas that he hadn't realized before, things that are a little bit closer to home. Uh,
Yep.
you know, he talks about he's I think he said it is something about I have looked upon all that the universe has to hold of horror, and even the skies of spring and the flowers of summer must ever after be poison to me. So now he sees it everywhere. Like how maddening must that be to not like you can try all you want to let this go and you can't. Like that's madness. And it's
It's a waking nightmare.
I have to deal with that just whew, oh boy.
Well, anyway, we should probably start wrapping up here. It is 9:01 now officially, so that is our hour slot for the Cthulhu book. Do you have any final thoughts about the book, Alex?
Like I said earlier, I would highly recommend anybody who's interested in horror or even mythology in general, go ahead and read it. Again, keep in mind the context of the book and the author as you do, but feel free to, I would recommend trying to just immerse yourself in it if you really want to get the full experience. It is a good read, and it has definitely made me want to read more of his works for sure. And I'm looking forward to that prospect. Um, how
Yeah,
about you, Adam?
I gotta agree with that. It definitely, like, I had heard of H.P. Lovecraft before, and I've heard of Cthulhu. Obviously, I mean, who hasn't heard of Cthulhu? But I had never investigated this particular book until Alan was like, "Hey, man, you should check this book out," and I was like, "Yeah, okay, I guess when I got time." And he was like, "No, really, check it out." I'm like, "Okay, okay." I checked it out, and I was like, "All right, I guess." Even though it was written 100 years ago, it's pretty good.
I will say this though, having read it as an audiobook, sometimes when you listen to audiobooks, your attention can kind of wane a little bit because you're not 100% engaged. If you're going to do it that way, I recommend setting aside time to read it a couple times because it really did take a couple of times to fully sink into it the way that I think it really needs to be paid attention to. So I would either recommend if you listen to it in audio, make it the only thing you're doing, or be willing to listen to it multiple times. Or I would recommend maybe just going ahead and reading the text outright. It's not that long. You could probably read through the entire thing in a couple hours at most.
That's
And
something too that's like really resonated with me is I've always been the kind of person who likes really, really long stories. I don't want to drop out of a story too soon because I want to just immerse myself in it for as long as possible. And the fact that these Lovecraft stories are not giant novels that just keep going on and on. They're just quick little blurbs that hit you right in the feels is kind of interesting to me.
yep, so like we said, definitely take a look into it. We highly recommend it for those who love mythos, horror, and general creepies. uh, and I think we're going to go ahead and start to wrap things up with a final look at our.
Yes. So some plugs real quick. If you want to check us out, any of the book readings, any 800's book clubs, they'll be on our YouTube page, DM's Table, and you can probably find them on our Twitch page as well as highlights. Those will hopefully include our comment section, so you can see all of our community interaction and get more interest in the book than just what Alex and I have to say. We also have a Patreon. The idea for book selection moving forward is going to be we have a list of 5 books or so that Alex and I are interested in. We will pitch it to our patrons at Patreon, and you guys can vote on it, and whichever book comes out on top will be the next book that we do. Next week's book is going to be, or not, yes, it is next week because we're doing this on the 7th. So the next book we're going to do is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. It's the exact opposite of this book. It's like 40 hours long in audio instead of 1.5. But it's a great story that I've personally enjoyed multiple times, and Alex has had the definite pleasure of enjoying for the first time for the 800's. So we'll kind of talk a
Don't
little
put
bit
words in my mouth. I'll let you know how I feel about it on the live stream.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, join us on Twitter as well at DM's Table, and on Facebook as well. Find us at DM's Table there as well.
Also,
Go ahead.
while we're at it, for those of you who might have book recommendations for us, feel free to hit us up on Discord and let us know what your recommendations are. And depending on what we're feeling, we may add them to the list for our patrons to vote on. So you can have at least something of a say if you go ahead and join us in the chat.
Yeah, definitely hit us up for that Discord invite, and we'll get one over to you so you can join us in the chat to talk about more books. We talk about books all the time, not just the 800's books, but any book that comes to mind. Anybody in our Discord that wants to read a book, they like to comment in the Discord and say, oh, I like this book, you guys should check it out, or have you ever heard of this book? And we have some conversations in there, and it's definitely a good place to check out. So check us out on Discord.
Yeah, and the other thing is on Discord, the community goes well beyond the 800. So if you have other hobbies or anything that you would like to share with people, we also encourage you to share those with us as well. And it's at the DM's Table, Adam.
Thanks. Yes, I am Twitter inefficient, so yes.
All right, so I think that wraps up all of our plugs. Thank you everybody for joining us on our first unofficial stream, and we look forward to seeing.
So to clarify, it's at DM's Table on Twitter and at the DM's Table on Facebook. So we added a "the" in there for.
Yeah, you can see it on our little thing down here below me and next to Adam.
Yes. Is it this way? This way?
Hold
One
on,
of the
give me a
ways.
second.
This is the
It's
way.
hold on. Man, this lag isn't long.
Anyway, it's on the screen. You guys can see it. So
It's this
thank
way or
you,
this way.
thank you, VS Drake, for your comments, and
Yeah,
anybody else
thank you
following.
very much to our technical worker as well, Alan. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yep. So yeah, we'll see you guys.